Lily Phillips. She has become quite famous because of a documentary that's been released.
Talking about her goal of sleeping with 100 men in the one day.
If I'm honest, it was hard.
Like more intense than you thought it might?
Definitely.
On one hand, OnlyFans can be so empowering for some people, but I also think it's important to talk about the grey and to talk about the times when maybe it isn't empowering. I think it's fine to kind of think, okay, well, look, she's setting these parameters for herself. She's making these decisions. But if those decisions are purely based on the fact that she's making millions and millions of dollars off the back of it, I do question, like, will money be enough to resolve any sort of residual feeling of like, I didn't want to be doing this? Something that we've been talking about in our group chat recently, and it may or not be something that you have seen and are also familiar with. There is a woman, her name is Lily Phillips. She's 23 years old and she is an OnlyFans creator. And the reason why she has become quite famous is because she has set the enormous goal of sleeping with 1,000 men in 24 hours. Now, this seems to be something that is becoming more and more common. You guys might remember Bonnie Blue. She was the very infamous OnlyFans creator who really made her mark by saying that she was going to sleep with the schoolies boys. She had her visa revoked, and there was so much absolute rage about that situation. But it does seem as though that there is this increasing sort of push for content that revolves around setting records for the amount of men that you can sleep with in a short period of time. We've spoken about OnlyFans quite a few times on this podcast before, and also we've interviewed Angela White, who is a prolific porn star, and she even said that she makes the majority of her income via OnlyFans now, and it has been an incredibly empowering platform for her where she has agency, where she owns her own content, produces her own content, and is able to make an income, without the same amount of effort that she has to for her normal productions. But I guess this conversation around Lily really comes back to a documentary that's been released that shows both sides of this record that she is trying to set. And it really asks the question whether or not that the OnlyFans in and of itself, whether the people who are on there are being forced to create content that is more and more sensational in order to get the downloads and in order to get the clicks and in order to continue to make this revenue.
So Josh Peters is the YouTube guy who actually created this documentary. It was released a week ago and it has nearly 4 million views. It was titled, I Slept with 100 Men in a Day. And the documentary is Josh speaking with Lily for the majority of it and talking about, how she got into OnlyFans. So for a bit of context, she started OnlyFans when she was at uni. She now has 9 employees, which is a pretty substantial team. Josh calls her a businesswoman in the documentary. Her parents have always known what she has been up to and have always been across the fact that she's creating this content, and not the nitty-gritty details, but they are aware and they are still very much in her life. She speaks with her mum every day. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because I think this documentary for me was really interesting to examine the stereotypes that exist in terms of the reasons why people get into sex work and compare that with my own biases about what I think about sex work and how the world views it as a very shameful career. So the documentary starts with some conversations between Josh and Lily talking about her goal of sleeping with 100 men in the one day. And so this is in training for this world record attempt that she will be making shortly, where she wants to sleep with 1,000 men in a day. They were talking about her motivations, about her fantasies, about her early OnlyFans career and how that has led her to the point that she wants to kind of set herself these challenges and film them for her OnlyFans. And this is what she had to say ahead of the challenge.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'm nervous for is for them to have a good time. I want to make sure they enjoy themselves and don't come away from it like, oh, I feel disgusted or that wasn't fun. I think other people in the industry definitely look down on me for doing this, but I think at the end of the day, people forget that it's also my fantasy, and this is also something that I'm really enjoying and want to do and have wanted to do before I was even in the industry.
Something that I found really interesting in the documentary was actually the logistics of how they were organising the 100 men that were going to be sleeping with Lily on the day. I think it's not even generous to say that it was disorganized as anything, and it seemed to be done by people who really didn't necessarily understand that this could be a risk to her safety. It could be a risk to their safety. It was done by her assistants. They basically put a call out on her OnlyFans and had people submit their application that they wanted to be one of the 100 men who slept with Lily. They were to send a photo of themselves alongside with their ID. And these were the concerns that Josh Peters, the guy who created the documentary, had about the way that they were selecting men.
The whole thing, I think I'm realizing, is actually more mental than we originally thought. There are 100 men turning up to have sex with her for 5 minutes each in a single day. I mean, there's a decent chance that one of them is going to be dangerous. One of them might have a weapon, have a criminal record. A few of them will have STIs. I can just on a basic statistic, you can know that a few of them are going to have STIs. So let's just hope those condoms are good ones.
Now, what was interesting about these 100 men that were selected to be the men who were going to sleep with Lily on this day is that on the day of the actual, I guess, experiment or the challenge, I guess I could call it, quite a few of them pulled out. And so the assistants who were organising this kind of ended up using a referral policy with the men who were there. And they said, hey, you know, if you had a good time and you have a friend, do you reckon you could message them, send them where we are, send them the Airbnb details and get in contact with us, because we've had so many pull out that in order to make this 100 men, we need more men.
We need more people.
And so they were recruiting kind of like on the spot.
Well, she was also saying that like the people who were prioritized were people who had had their STI checks done, but also getting to a point where they didn't have enough people to actually fulfill that 100-man goal meant that they had to, I guess, be more lax with how they found participants. Look, I mean, the reason why we wanted to talk about this isn't so much around the goal setting or this astronomical feat of trying to sleep with X amount of people in a certain amount of time. It's because of a specific part of this interview that has gone very viral. And it's of Lily reflecting on that 100 men experience. She went into it with such a positive outlook. She went into it with such a conviction that she was going to enjoy the experience, that the experience was a fantasy of hers. And then the follow-up interview really showed something that felt quite dark in comparison.
And just for some context, if there are a couple of words that are muted in this, that's how the documentary had to publish the YouTube. So it might just sound a little bit cut to you. And each of the men logistically were to be given 5 minutes to spend with Lily. So this is Lily directly after they had completed the challenge of 100 men.
Just one in, one out, like it feels intense.
Like more intense than you thought it might.
Definitely.
Sorry. Okay. Okay. Just take
Yeah, 1 minute. You know when I talked to you last, like I was not nervous. It was like the day before I was like, oh, I'm so nervous. But it was good. It was more, I guess the interactions when like, I'd have to stop them early and like, you'd have to stand on business and be like, I'm so sorry, you got to go. And like the awkward interaction of like you feeling pressure to have to make them come if like you haven't spent enough time with them and feeling like they didn't, like you didn't give them a good time because like they only got 2 minutes.
And that's what's making you feel emotional, is that maybe you think you didn't give some guys a good enough time today?
Yeah, and it's hard, I think, having the interactions with them when they're like, what, you're not going to make me finish? I've come all this way. Like, kind of like guilt tripping me a little bit. I felt bad, like some people had just travelled so far, like I didn't want to give them a shit time and like come away from this and be like, oh, that was shit. I think sometimes like feeling so like robotic, like by the, I think like the 30th, you know, like when we're getting on a bit, I've got like a routine of like how we're going to do this. And like, it just, sometimes you'd like disassociate and be like, you know, like it's not like normal things at all. In my head right now, I can think of like 5, 6 guys, 10 guys that I remember. And that's it. But it's just, I don't know, it's just weird, isn't it? Like, if I didn't have the videos, I wouldn't have known I've done 100, you know?
I think for anyone listening to that audio, when I listened to it the first time, my very first response was how devastating that sounded. And it makes me ask the question, right? often we can have fantasies. Often we can think that something is going to be a certain way. And then when we actually experience it ourselves, the reality of a situation is very, very different from what we thought it was going to be. But the issue in this situation is almost that Lily can't change her mind about it because it has been so public. She has set herself the goal of sleeping with 1,000 men. She has so many OnlyFans subscribers. This is how she is now making her income. This is what she has become known for. So it's kind of a situation of pressure where she can't go back on the goal that has been set. And it's very evident in that piece of audio that Lily is quite distressed after sleeping with 100 men and that it wasn't necessarily what she expected it was going to be, and it was a lot harder than what she expected it to be, in her own words. But then she's gone on to do many podcasts and to speak about it publicly, to say that she actually did really enjoy the experience and also that she does still have the goal of sleeping with 1,000 men. I mean, we've spoken about it heaps between the two of us and also like within the Life Uncut chat that we have, because on one hand, we've had so many conversations about how OnlyFans can be so empowering for some people and how it has been a really empowering platform for many sex workers. But I also think it's important to talk about the grey and to talk about the times when maybe it isn't empowering. And I watched that video and I watched that documentary, and it makes me question whether or not this is empowering for Lily, a 23-year-old OnlyFans creator, whether this is actually doing psychological harm in the long term, or whether this is content that in 10, 20 years' time, or even directly after she sleeps with this 1,000 men, that she's not actually going to enjoy.
I also feel a bit uncomfortable about even thinking about that because on one hand, she's 23 years old. She has agency. You know, she's not being pressured into this by any external factors other than some that we may get to that we think could be going on psychologically. And so a part of me is just like, what's it my place to have an opinion on this, you know?
Absolutely.
And then the other part of me watches the documentary and I was really, really taken back by how much I felt for her. And I was trying to understand why that might be the case. And I was like, well, she's not a victim. She's chosen to get herself into this position. She said that this is her fantasy. But it really did make me think about, and I think all of us may have been in a situation like this before where we've set ourselves a goal of, you know, we wanted to achieve something, and whether that be that you want to run a marathon or whether it be that you want to do a certain thing for your job or whatever it is. And you can find yourself in the situation and you realize like, actually, this is so not what I thought it was going to be, but I can't back out now. I can't back out because I've told people that I was going to achieve it. In Lily's case, she has literally traded a certain subscription fee, telling people this is what I'm going to do. And I think that the pressure of that would be pretty overwhelming because not only would she almost have to, I hate saying the word face up to the fact that maybe the experience wasn't what she thought, but there is also a possibility that that was just her immediate reaction. She was really exhausted. She was going at it quite literally for 14 hours. She'd had to have multiple showers throughout the day. She was probably physically very, very exhausted.
For sure.
And so I don't want to kind of go, well, that's actually how she, you know, we just got insight into how she actually feels about it.
Well, because it kind of is like affirmation bias, right? Like we already know that the industry, there is so much dehumanizing that goes on. There is so much shame that is like completely enshrouded in the sex industry. And the pendulum is swinging. Like we have had many conversations around how people don't just get into sex work because they're impoverished or because it is an absolute need or there's addiction issues, which I think used to be the real mentality. People thought surely people would only do this for a job because they had to. And we know that the mentality around that is changing and that there are so many people who get into this work because they want to. But I guess the big part of this is seeing Lily so upset after setting herself this goal and going through with the 100 men, knowing that she has the goal of 1,000. It's like, is it affirmation bias, that part of the documentary where when you see her upset, you're like, aha, I knew you would regret this. You have confirmed to me that the way I feel about what you're doing is correct. Or is it actually just, like you said, Keish, a natural reaction to something that is akin to a marathon? Many people who do wildly physical activities cry throughout doing those physical activities or don't love doing them whilst they're in the midst of that goal setting. And I want to be really careful about making this comparison. I know you laugh because I'm like, it sounds worlds apart, but just hear me out on the theory around this.
It's because when we were talking about this, when you first said the name that you're about to say, I was like, what are you
You're like, where
talking
the
about?
fuck
And then
are
when
you
you
going?
explained it, I was like, oh no, I so get what you mean.
Okay. All right. So hear me out. Ned Brockman recently, he's going to be thrilled that I'm talking about him right now.
He's going to be sleeping with 1,000 men in a day.
He's certainly not. No, but he recently, I mean, as you guys might be familiar with Ned Brockman, he's an incredible man who has raised so much money for homelessness by his marathons. So he ran from Perth to Bondi. He also recently did a new challenge, which was running 100 kilometers a day for 16 days. Ridiculous, right? And all of Australia got behind him in doing this. There were many moments throughout his marathon where he was crying, where he was swearing, where he looked very displeased that he was doing it, and he absolutely continued on. I think it's definitely a far stretch to compare a physical marathon to a sex marathon and like have those things kind of like sit within the same realm or the same, even within the same hemisphere. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that nobody questioned Ned Brockman crying. Nobody was like, aha, see, you regret doing this. You hate this. But that has been our natural reaction to Lily doing this. Seeing her crying on that documentary, the instant reaction is to think, oh my God, are you going to regret this? Is this the worst decision that you have made for yourself? And I guess it is because there is an opportunity or there is a possibility that she will. But it's also not our place to have that fear for her because it is a decision that she's making for herself.
I think also this is where we get into the realm of concern trolling, where like faux concern. If you look on Lily's Instagram, which I did last night, and my God, I regret doing it. It was an absolute cesspit. The amount of shame being put onto her was quite literally disgusting. There's an amount that no matter how primed and prepped you were, no matter if you'd grown up with this your entire life, I don't think we are ever psychologically able to handle that amount of scrutiny from the world. And I truly felt for her in that moment. But I thought about this internally of why I had this deep amount of concern for her, given that, like, you know, she has all of the things similar to Ned, where she'd set herself the challenge, she'd achieved the challenge that she went out there for, she showed emotion, but Ned did too. You know, why did I feel like it was different? And I got myself into a little bit of a rabbit hole when she said that she felt like she dissociated. You know, she could only really remember 6 of the men out of the 100 or 6 to 10 of the men. And if she didn't have the footage of that experience, she wouldn't have really thought that it actually had occurred. And I did go a little bit deep on this because I thought maybe that's why I feel so uncomfortable about it. Maybe it's the fact that she feels as though to accomplish this challenge, she has to literally feel an out-of-body experience. She doesn't want to feel physically connected to it herself. And I did a bit of research, and Stanford Medicine said that between 2 and 10% of the population will experience the phenomenon known as dissociation during their lives, but that dissociation usually occurs as a result of trauma, hypnosis, or certain drugs. And this is where I thought, oh, maybe this is why I feel so deeply uncomfortable about this. She's obviously not under the influence of drugs. She's not under hypnosis. Do I feel uncomfortable because I actually think she could be causing quite serious psychological trauma to herself? You know, she said that she has dissociated in the experience and that she wants to times that experience by 10-fold. She wants to up it to 1,000 men. Do I see a young woman, someone who's 23 years old, making choices that I think could have very serious psychological impacts for them long term? Maybe. Maybe that's why I actually feel concerned for Lily. And I hope that that's the case because I don't think that we can ever completely separate ourselves from the fact that, you know, most of the trolling that was going on her Instagram was like, wow, I bet your parents are proud of you. It was such slut shaming that I think we've all become somewhat accustomed to as we were growing up. And, you know, we were told to worry about body counts and we were told to think of ourselves as pure and saving ourselves for the right person. I don't think I can ever fully remove myself from those messages, even though we have spent so long really pushing the narrative in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and trying to unpick it.
Yeah. And I guess I landed on the fact that maybe Lily actually was involved in this experience because she felt the pressure to live up to a goal that she had created for herself, even though she was putting herself through a lot of psychological stress. And I don't think it would be normal if you didn't have care for that. I don't think it would be normal to see that and see how upset she was and not feel as though you had some type of sympathy for her, that, you know, she might not be a victim in the sex industry, how we typically used to think of victims, but maybe she's a victim to the algorithms now. Maybe she's a victim to the fact that we have to have more outrageous and out there content to draw people in?
Yeah, well, I guess the big question is this empowering? And that has always been the question around OnlyFans. And it has really been like the thing that set it apart in so many ways, is that OnlyFans was and is empowering. I think of creators like Bonnie Blue. I know we've mentioned her a couple of times. She talks about the experiences that she's had. And I've listened to so many podcast episodes where she speaks around it being something that she wants to do. She feels empowered by it. She enjoys it. She has never outwardly, or publicly at least, spoken in a negative way. And I think that this is the first time where we have seen a creator like this. Actually, I take that back. It's the second time that we have seen a creator like this speak about an experience and show negative reactions to what they've just gone through. And the other person that I want to talk about very quickly is Lisa Sparks. So Lisa Sparks is the sex worker who has the record for the most men slept with in a 24-hour period. In 2004, she slept with 919 men in one day at a sex industry event in Poland. Now, interestingly, Lisa, who was in the industry for literally 25 years, came out and said, "To be completely transparent with you all, this event is the only thing I regret doing in my 23 plus years in the porn industry. To this day, this was also the only job that I agreed to perform strictly for the money." I think that is such an interesting and important quote, because I think it's fine to kind of think, okay, well, look, she's setting these parameters for herself. She's making these decisions. But if those decisions are purely based on the fact that she is now accruing a huge amount of subscribers and is making millions and millions of dollars off the back of it, I do question, like, will money be enough to resolve any sort of residual feeling of like, I didn't want to be doing this, but the money was good enough?
Yeah, and it kind of makes me question, like, removing the fact that we've said, OnlyFans enabled empowerment of women, particularly in the sex industry. At what point does someone step in? Because if these women are working for themselves, there's no referee. There's no one who's there to say, we're going too far. Like, we've actually pushed the boundaries too much. You're not coping with this. And I wonder whether we've replaced that with the public, who are the subscribers. I kind of equate that pressure of the expectation to now being, well, we have things like AI porn, a lot more accessibility to this type of content. And therefore the goalposts do seem to keep shifting. With these creators that are getting a lot of headlines and a lot of media attention, it's because they're doing more and more outrageous things.
Also, I mean, we talk about people being victims to an industry. And you brought up a really important point before, Keeshia. It's not being victims to the industry of being a sex worker. And I really want to make that clear. It's being a victim to content. It's being a victim to having to push things further and further in order to have the same impact. And that exists in all aspects of content creation. I think about people I think about us, for example, speaking about our lives or speaking about personal things and things that when we very first started this podcast, we were like, we would never, ever talk about. And then years and years down the track, you get more comfortable. You become more familiar with the platform. You become more familiar with your audience. And that kind of the bar gets pushed further and further. Now, I'm not saying that there's ever been a time where I've shared something that I've regretted. I love sharing what I share. But I also know that there could come a time in the future where one of my kids might say, hey, Mum, I really didn't like that you shared that story about me when I was 5, because now it's something that lives forever on the internet and I didn't ask you to share that. Like, that's a possibility. And it is this question of like, well, where is the line? And when does content and content creation, the snowball effect of it, become too much?
And I think that was my overall takeaway from the whole documentary. I felt as though Lily does not have control over that snowball. And that's my own personal opinion. Other people might disagree. And I don't want for people to misinterpret that as me kind of putting an element of shame onto her. I really thought, wow, I so hope that the next business decision you make is that you get a manager who genuinely gives a fuck about you and is willing to help you establish what you are and aren't comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because I felt as though I saw the dissolving of boundaries. That one particular thing that really stood out to me was how much she cared about the experience of the men that she was sleeping with.
Which is like for any woman who is in their 20s, and I say, actually, it doesn't matter what age you are, but I think about this from when I was in my 20s, how much I cared about making sure that the person I was with had a good time above my own satisfaction.
100% relate.
Like the things that I would have done in my 20s, the things I did do, which I look back on now and go, that would have been a straight up fucking no. But I wanted him to have a good time. And so I deprioritized my discomfort or my feelings of like, oh, that kind of makes me feel icky for his pleasure. And my worry, which echoes what you say in this, Keeshia, is that if this is going to be about money or be about an experience, the boundaries have to be so firm. It's you come in, you get your 1.5 minutes, your 5 minutes, whatever it is, because literally, I mean, we've done the maths. To sleep with 1,000 men in 24 hours, each man would have 1 minute and 40 seconds. Like that's a boundary that has to be firm in order to reach that goal. So it's almost as though they need someone there who doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be Lily. Lily isn't the one saying, hey, you need to leave now, because that's almost too much pressure for someone who's already in quite a vulnerable position to be able to exact those sort of boundaries. It's crazy to me how unregulated it is and how someone who is a creator can simply be like, all right, everyone, just rock up to this address, because there are so many elements to it that are really unsafe.
I contrast this with the conversation that you guys had with Angela White. Angela White had been in the sex industry for quite a while before she started her OnlyFans. She now has her own production company where she is the one making the rules. You know, she's the one saying yes or no, but she also has the considerations of things like her safety. She has her boundaries. They are firm as anything. She, you know, her actual words were, if it's not a fuck yes, it's a no to me. And I compare that to Lily, and I think that they're worlds apart. And that's why I think I can find Angela's work really empowering. And I can say, wow, that's amazing that you're doing this and you're making all of this money from it. And I look at Lily and I think you're in a potentially dangerous situation because you don't have any of the infrastructure around you to support you to make sure that you're going to be okay. And I mean that physically and psychologically.
Yeah, and I mean, like we said at the very beginning, we toyed around whether we should have this conversation or not. But we had been speaking about it quite a bit, and we were like, you know, when something keeps coming up, it's what makes us realize, okay, yes, it's definitely something we want to discuss. But the question was whether or not talking about this in this light undoes all of the really positive conversations that have kind of pushed the pendulum into the area of like, okay, well, look, sex workers also have agency. They're not all victims, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think it's really important to talk about the full spectrum of this. And there are instances where it sits in the grey. And for us, this was definitely one of those discussions that sat within the grey. And I think most people who have seen that part of this documentary, and we will link everything in the show notes, would feel as uncomfortable as we felt. Overarchingly, and the question that we all keep coming back to is this version empowering for women?